of Q Points, and I wanted to come to you because there are two really important ways that you can support our show. One is by subscribing to it wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. Q Points is pretty much everywhere. The other thing that you can do is you can visit us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on Podchaser, and you can leave us a star rating. Please rate us 5 stars because you know you love Q Points. And on Apple Podcasts and on Podchaser, you can actually leave us a written review. It's not required, but it really does help to spread the word about the show, and it helps people to discover it as they're looking for new podcasts to listen to. We're always appreciative of you supporting Q Points. We thank you so much for all that you've done for us so far, and enjoy the show.
Hey, yes, y'all. Welcome back. It is another episode of Q Points. I am DJ Sir Daniel.
And my name is J. Ray, sometimes known by my government as Johnny Ray Cornegate III. What's happening, y'all?
Listen, you all are in for a treat this evening. Look, if I do say so myself, I'm super excited. But before we do any of that, J. Ray, how are you, good brother?
Bruh. That's the day. So I'm gonna just say that. And also I'm a second your excitement about tonight's show. We got something new and different for the people that they're about to experience, and I'm excited that y'all are about to experience it. How are you?
You know what? I'm very well after a nice disco nap.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what happened throughout the day, if I get me a nice disco nap, um, when I get home, when I come down to the music and start doing things pertaining to this or to my DJing, it just washes away anything that could have happened earlier today. So I am in a good place, and so are you, because you are here, you're alive, you're breathing, and you are witnessing another dope episode of Q Points. Let's give a shout out to Carlton. Carlton is in the building, already in the chat. Thank you for joining us. J. Ray, you are dropping tons of science in the chat right now on how to become a Q Points insider, and most importantly, how you can have your voice heard and vote for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominees for 2022. Tell them about it, J. Ray.
Yes. So as y'all know, we are on a campaign to make sure that all of y'all vote for the black folks that are up for induction or consideration for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So the fan votes help, they get counted as they're counting all the votes to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right? So this is part of our series. We've already talked about Dionne Warwick. We've already talked about Lionel Richie. Tonight we are talking about Fela Kuti, and next week we are talking about A Tribe Called Quest. And you get to vote for all of these people. So vote for everybody black and one more person. The link is in the chat. Make sure that y'all do that.
We are unashamed about it. So I guess we can go ahead and get started. I had I say you all are in for a treat because I had the distinction of, let me say this, because Fela Kuti is such an important figure in modern music, right? Because he is so important to what we all know as Afrobeat and Afrobeats.
Right.
And you all are about to find out about that distinction. So because it's so important, we decided we needed to reach out to somebody who has made this their life's work, dedicated their life to the creation and preservation of the legacy of Fela Kuti. And so I have the honor and distinction of getting to speak with none other than Mausiki Scales, a dope, legendary artist here in Atlanta. That has been performing music for over 20 years and has had the distinction of working with tons of people, Roy Ayers, you name it. This gentleman has played with them, Stevie Wonder. I mean, the list goes on, but tonight we are definitely talking about Fela Kuti and what he means to not only popular Black music, popular today, but just the history of Black music in the diaspora, Black music here in America and beyond. So I don't know what else to say, but please enjoy this interview. I'm going to be watching just like you and listening because I'm a complete student right now. So J. Ray, let's take it away.
Listen. Oh, and before we jump in, I'm putting in a link. We want to send a huge shout out to JB, Jonathan Blanchard, over at JB's Record Lounge.
Oh my God.
For bridging this gap. Yo, this is y'all. So I see Wani is in the chat. Carlton is in the chat. We had our brother JB make sure that we made the connection with Mr. Scales. Yes. This is community, y'all. And this is what this thing is about. Like, we are talking about our history and our people. So I just want to drop in the chat. If you haven't been to JB's Record Lounge website, you need to go on over there and check it out and get you something because we got to support our folks.
Absolutely. And good news, JB is coming back, and I'll tell you more about that on the other side of the interview with Mausiki Scales.
Perfect. And at the beginning of this, there's a little bit of a technical thing. Stay with it, y'all. Give us like 2 minutes. It gets fixed. But I didn't want to cut anything out because it's a whole vibe. So enjoy. Yes. We'll be back on the other side.
Welcome, Mausiki Scales, to the show. On behalf of J. Ray and myself, it is an honor to have someone of your pedigree on our broadcast. Let me just say. And I want to big up Jonathan Blanchard, a.k.a. JB, for making the link happen. So I appreciate both of you.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the talk, to the dialogue.
Absolutely. So before we delve into the greatness that is Fela Kuti, let me give you some shine really quickly. Mr. Mausiki Scales is an accomplished musician and recording artist and the founder of the Common Ground Collective, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. You are currently teaching a course at Georgia State University as part of the History of African American Music series called Black People, the Music of African Americans. First of all, I'm jealous because I wish there was a course like that when I was in Georgia State. I probably wouldn't have dropped out from Georgia State at the time, but that was a long time ago. But what are students in for when they sit in Professor Scales' classroom?
Well, we take a look at the origins of Black music of the African diaspora. So most of my students right now, of course, are in love with hip hop, but we get into the story of how do we get to hip hop. And even before we get to hip hop, we have to look at the lineage of Black music in this part of the world. How did we get here? So as you likely know, the majority of our ancestors come from West and West Central Africa. About 90% of our ancestry is from that particular region in Africa. And so as our ancestors were forced across the Atlantic Ocean, they brought a particular ethic with them, an aesthetic with them. And early on, we had the drum. And because the drum was used as a part of a pivotal revolt among captive Africans, the drum becomes outlawed in varying places, like in the colony of South Carolina in 1740 with the Negro Act, responding to the Stono Rebellion. So we look at that particular theater of revolt, the impact of the loss of the drums as is outlawed. Of course, we still drum, we still jubapat, we still use percussive objects in our environment. And then there's a shift to turning toward the strings. So when we think about the first music Black people created collectively, we think about the spirituals and the blues, but we don't tend to think about music that has a heavy drum beat, right? We think of the blues, you don't think of the drum, you think of a string instrument. So now that this drum is suppressed, we turn our attention to the strings of the fiddle and the banjo, that hands off to a derogatory tradition by Europeans mocking Black music known as blackface minstrelsy. Minstrelsy, because it's a heavy focus on the banjo. Now we pivot and look at ragtime. Ragtime as a precursor to the blues. Ragtime becomes the first music to sell 1 million copies of sheet music. So there's a craze. We now see entry into music as a commodity, because up to that point, music is primarily meant Black music for Black people, African music for African people. Now outsiders are hearing it. Tension is created as this music, when jazz is created in the 1920s, is not even respected as music by the broader society. It's not written, it's not predictable, it's heavily improvised. And it was taught even in some journals that this music is going to take us back to the jungle. It's not music that's civilized. And unfortunately, many Black people began to take on even those type of ideas. But here we are with a legacy of dynamic music created by people under some of the most oppressive conditions. But the level of creativity is quite amazing. The continuity from the spirituals, work songs, blues, ragtime, jazz, funk, several different versions of jazz, gospel, techno, trap. The list goes on in terms of the creativity, hip hop, all of the different expressions we see. And also in the class, we emphasize, while it's labeled African-American music or music of this part of the diaspora, we also are very intentional about creating linkages with our brothers and sisters in Brazil, Cuba, the Caribbean, and the continent of Africa. So it's an exciting experience. And while I'm sharing as the instructor, my students are definitely putting me on to some great music as well.
I love it. And I think that point right there is the whole basis of Cue Points, this particular show, because as you stated, all of those musics, all of those styles of music are part of a continuum, and they have their origins, of course, in Africa. And so part of what we love to do is we love to give flowers to those artists who are pioneers in these different genres. Right. And we give them flowers, and we like to put people on, but I like to learn. We like to learn as well. And so this is a really super dope opportunity for all of us involved here. Now, part of what we're doing, this is part of our Rock and Roll Hall of Fame series, because we are invested in, primarily, we love everybody that's on this year's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominee list, but we are primarily invested in 4 entities on that list. And we've spoken of Dionne Warwick. Last week we did our show on Lionel Richie, and this week we are here to discuss Fela Kuti and his contributions to just everything. I believe everything that we're listening to now and everything that is popular, that's bumping in the clubs right now, can be traced back to Brother Kuti. But please tell the audience, your connection to Fela Kuti, the person and the music, because you have a connection to both.
Right. So just as you mentioned about the continuity of Black music and African music, in my class, we have something that we emphasize called the living tradition. So it's one thing to read in books and to watch videos, but what does music mean to those of us that are living? How is it passed down? And all throughout much of Africa, information is transmitted orally, right? You apprentice under someone, and that music is able to go from one generation to the next. So I'm a graduate of Tuskegee as well as Clark Atlanta, and hearing that HBCU sound from the marching band, while I'm hearing that as I've come south, because I'm born in Gary, Indiana, I'm also beginning to research scholars like Sheikh Ante Diop, Drusilla Dungy Houston, Chancellor Williams, these great scholars that have shined a particular light on Africa. So there's this yearning to understand something about myself and to go deeper. And I found that sonically in Fela's music, that he's naming his band after Egypt, he's naming his band after Africa. But this is done at a particular pivotal point after 1969, after meeting Sister Sandra Isidore, where he becomes more politicized as she is a Black Panther. She shared with him the teachings of Malcolm X. And so at that pivotal point, some of those same books that I mentioned, Dr. Ben's books, are now at the shrine where Fela is performing in Nigeria. And there's this spirit of vindicating Black people. There's the platform of Pan-Africanism, platform of Black nationalism, of Black people moving in a self-determined way in the spirit of Marcus Garvey, in the spirit of Callie House, where we can do for self. And so as I'm in college, as I'm in graduate school, there's a particular tune that we would listen to in the home, and this is ODOO, overtake, done, overtake, overtake. And I would clean the house to this particular song, and this song could run for 45 minutes. I'm like, when will this ever end? And within that sound, I felt like I heard myself. I heard elements of an environment that I grew up in where I'm listening to Parliament Funkadelic, where I'm hearing the call and response, which our ancestors preserved from the agricultural work songs that we brought with us from West Africa. The idea that every instrument is a drum. Fela had that concept, but James Brown had that concept as well. The deep going percussion, the innovative solos within the music, the functioning in modes and not so much music changing keys in frequently. And it's something within that music that touched me as it had all of those sounds and all of that creativity going on. And I began to embrace this music as a performance style. There's also a very pivotal moment in Fela's music where he collaborates with the great Roy Ayers. Everybody Loves the Sunshine. And the music of many colors, center of the world, Africa. And we're seeing continental Africans and Africans of the diaspora collaborate within this music. Red, black, and green. You're seeing these themes at the forefront. And this is taking place at a time where much of Africa is gaining a new independence, overthrowing some of the previous colonizers in Africa, while simultaneously, Black people on this side of the world are experiencing a civil rights movement, Black power movement, a student movement. So there's similar themes regarding freedom in both spaces. And growing up in Gary, Chocolate City, there's that temperament was already established based on the music that I was listening to, based on the type of books my parents had me reading, and in some cases, the authors. My mother would drag me out on a Saturday where I've met Maya Angelou. I'm 10 and 12 years old, and not really knowing the impact of meeting her and Gwendolyn Brooks, these type of individuals, but it would come full circle through Fela's music as well as through some other literature. So his music became a performing style for my group nearly 20 years ago at this point, that we have been performing Afrobeat, and where that intersects with funk music, the blues, in the tradition of vindicating Black folks.
So this, you mentioned Afrobeat. It's funny you use that term. Fela Kuti, Nigerian-born musician, widely known as the father of Afrobeat. Do you have an opinion around the adoption of the term Afrobeats as a style of contemporary music when Afrobeat was already established as a genre?
Sure. I don't think any of these styles necessarily drop out of the sky pure, that we're looking at each of these as a blending of what came before. And I think the river will continue to flow. So Afrobeat, singularly, Afrobeat with a T at the end, was coined by Fela in 1969. This style of music heavily emphasized the tenor range vocal, chicken scratch style guitar, single line picking guitar, and the polyrhythms that we would hear in high life music, as well as elements of jazz. And so to hear Afro beats today, I definitely know Fela is quoted as saying, He listened to Miles Davis and John Coltrane. So he too was in that tradition of being inspired by those people that are your contemporaries, as well as those who came before. Tony Allen, his drummer, would also listen to Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And he talks about embracing that. And it's fascinating to see this dialogue take place in diaspora as South Africa in the 1910, 1920s had a big band style jazz element taking place. Rumba, calypso, and samba in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The 70s, Africa embraced James Brown, 80s reggae, 90s till now hip hop. So although Africa goes through 200 years of colonialism by European forces, its popular music continues to sort of consume itself. It's pulling on its diaspora and it's pulling on itself. That when you think about the music of the Congo, the music of Nigeria and Ghana, Nigeria's music doesn't sound like a poor imitation of British music, or nor does Ghana's. And so there's still something about maintaining one's integrity, although this dialogue and this echo that's taking place in diaspora, it seems as if there are boundaries. It seems as if that particular palette of pulling from those aspects, and when I say pull from those aspects, for instance, the music in America that we typically call, I shouldn't say we, but within music theory, that's labeled blue notes. Right? When our grandmother is in the kitchen making some collard greens and she's saying, right?
Okay.
Or the lining of hymns that take place in the church.
Right.
When we initially brought those tones with us through a West African blues tonal system, those Europeans in the environment said, well, what are those notes? Those notes are not in line with our do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And so there was a need to give them a name, which shows an overemphasis in labeling something and assessing something you didn't understand. And they're not standout notes to Black people. When Bessie Smith is singing the blues, she's not saying, well, these are blue notes. There's nothing special about them. They're not an aberration. When John Coltrane and Charlie Parker are playing those notes, they're not considered an aberration. It's an extension of the language. It's an extension of the culture. While someone outside of that experience felt the need to give those a name.
Label.
Right, because it's foreign to your cultural experience. And we've maintained it, and it's prestigious. We're at the blue note. These are blue notes, but in fact, it is born out of a misunderstanding, out of someone external to the culture labeling those notes, and we've moved forward, but they're not an aberration. If you look up blue notes in all of these texts, it's going to say a flatted fifth, flatted third, a flatted seventh of the, of the scale, and with bebop, even a flatted fifth. But for those individuals, it's not an aberration. If that's your language, if that's the tones that you're used to, why give it a special name? And so those kind of expressions, when I talk about Africa consuming itself, is that as the continent embraced gospel, blues, and jazz, is simply inviting home a cultural aesthetic that was forcibly sent out to a diaspora.
And I'm glad you brought up outsiders wanting to label. With the label comes making it consume something to consume and market and package. And then my question was leading up to the whole, why is it, that we finally caught on, the Black Americans have finally caught on to what is being called Afrobeat, when it's been in heavy rotation outside of the country. But to your point, somebody here in the United States said, you know what? We need something new to package or repackage to these people. And we're going to call it Afrobeat because that's really popular right now. But why now? Because to your point earlier, you were saying you could listen to that song for 45 minutes.
Right.
Right. But now we're talking an attention span that can only take a song that's maybe about 2-3 minutes at the max. So I think all of that is done on purpose. But like,
Sure.
why do you think now the Black Americans, now we're finally like, oh, I love that, the Essence song. And as a DJ, when I tell you, I'm looking out at crowds that have never, they like trap, they like, gangster rap, all that other stuff prior. But now all of a sudden, the craze is, oh, I love this song. And not everybody is, mimicking the dance moves that they've seen.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with how we consume music today. And I feel as if we may be in a time period where music is consumed based on streaming, which is a first, where artists really don't get the financial benefit of their music being purchased. And I think that even the genres, if you look, I mentioned Scott Joplin in the 1890s. Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag ends up becoming the first song that sell 1 million copies via sheet music, but it is also much of white America's entry into understanding this music that was viewed as extremely complex. So now we begin to see that this music has a selling point. And I think that we'd be hard pressed. We've all seen the movie The Color Purple, and we know on Friday night at the juke joint, Saturday night at the juke joint, those same musicians are in church on Sunday.
Absolutely.
But I do feel like it's coming from us being, to a large degree, conditioned from the outside as to what to listen to, what's trending, playlists. And I'm reminded of like what was music's original purpose. That when we gather, what tends to happen, right? When Black folks gather in particular, what tends to happen? It doesn't even matter the sacred part or the secular. If it moves us, it moves us. And I do think that the Afrobeat music of Fela, the beauty in Fela is he said, well, he said he didn't start wearing African clothes until he saw Black people wearing African clothes on 125th Street. And he would come to New York and party. He would party with Moshood, Michael from Good Times. I forget his name, acting name.
I know you're talking about, yeah.
He would gather and party with folks in their homes. And I think that with his relationship with Sandra Isidore, his relationship with Roy Ayers, we are seeing this connection to the diaspora, this part of the diaspora. And I just think that this idea of like finally being able to have access to Africa is extremely healthy because we hear ourselves in it all too often. I think that there's a stereotype folks in West Africa have of African Americans. I'm sure you've heard of the term Akata. And there's a stereotype that I think due to some of our ignorance about what is Africa. Do people have cars? Do they live in trees? These are real questions that have come up in certain spaces. And I think that just as we owe it to ourselves to explore that music, the music of our heritage, the music of the land of Africa and what it has to offer, I think that there's a similar dialogue that should take place here as our ancestors fought in the civil rights movement and Black power. And if there's a doorway that was created that gives folks space to move and to some extent a viable means here. And so for any of our brothers and sisters from the continent that come here that say, well, I don't want to have anything to do with this group of people, but yet you come through a doorway of sacrifice made by the recent ancestors of Black folks in this space. And I just think that a dialogue is needed because when we look at the decades before, that exchange was commonplace. Mary Wakiba, Hugh Masekela, Fela Kuti, Manu Dibango. We're hearing that funk. Well, we know funk when we hear it.
Absolutely.
And we move. And I think that folks that are listening to this music for the first time are hearing the same thing.
I want to go back to your exposure. You told us about your exposure to the music. Tell us about your connection to Fela, the person, and as a music, as you matriculated in your musicianship and meeting people that he's played with, his family. What was that like for you as a musician and just as, a fan, Mausiki Scales, the fan, what was that like?
I mean, it's wonderful to be in touch with Sandra Isidore and Roy Ayers and to collaborate with those individuals. I've spoken to Shayun as well, his son. And as a fan, it also gave me, speaking to these individuals and doing some collaboration and with them, gave me a sense of possibility that it shortened the distance between fandom, and it told me that I too am a part of this story, that as we create music that is a soundtrack to our lives, this is something that is very much doable. That when you look at the Fela's band, you're talking about 35, 40 traveling musicians going to LA for 10 months or touring throughout Europe. We don't think of bands like that. Maybe MC Hammer had the last entourage.
You're absolutely right.
Of that size.
Yeah.
And we are living in the sort of the age of the selfie. This is the age of the individual artist, pick up some musicians at the gig, sing behind a track. So that was inspiring as well. That Sister Sandra has been extremely encouraging in terms of the band. Shayun has listened to my last CD and was very encouraging, told me that the people in his compound loved it. And Uncle Roy, the same way, that we did a composition with Common Ground, an Afrobeat version of Everybody Loves the Sunshine. So it's wonderful to see the love and support that extends across continents. And so there is the fan side, but there is a very practical side where I'm like, okay, let me get this tune. I want it to hit just right. And I don't necessarily view myself as someone that says, well, I'm going to imitate every single aspect of it. Like Fela has a song, Yellow Fever, right? And then this song, Yellow Fever, we know yellow fever is this disease, but he's using it to tell a story about bleaching cream, which is extremely creative. And he said he got it from some young people who were mocking some folks that's caught up in the need to bleach their skin.
And that's still relevant to this day.
It's completely relevant.
Very relevant
to today. And until today, and I also like that idea of pulling from the proverbial wisdom of my folks. My dad is from Arkansas. My mom's from South Carolina. We grew up hearing those proverbs. So to the use of proverbs, Fela intentionally put his music in pidgin English. And there's Yoruba there too, but he didn't want it to be limited just to Yoruba speaking people. So he put it in pidgin English. This style of English common in Ghana as well as Nigeria, its cousin Patois in Jamaica, Haitian Creole, what we call Ebonics or scholars label AAVE. We have the relative aspect of that too. And we can connect that with the continuity of Black music, where the spirituals, no one's singing the spirituals in some standardized English, so-called proper English. No one is delivering hip hop in so-called proper English. We go to how we talk that talk. It doesn't matter whether it's the spirituals, the blues, no one's going to say, well, I got very excited. James Brown's going to say, I'm super bad, and super bad. He's going to deliver it that way. And so to see the continuity in our experience as it relates to language, to hear that same thing within Fela, I look at that experience as embracing his music by connecting the dots to my experience as an African in the diaspora. And so it's inspiring making those connections, not simply imitating, but using the framework and the approach to create compositions that are comparable to those old school tracks.
So we're talking about music and we're talking about projects. I want to talk to you about your latest project, but for our Q Points listeners, what if we want an entry, if we want a doorway into Fela Kuti, what your fandom, your educated guess, what is that? Give our viewers and listeners that one piece or that one project that you say, if you want to be introduced to Fela Kuti, this is where you must begin.
Well, can I list some of my favorite tracks?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So I think Zombie, where he criticized the military government of Nigeria. And unfortunately, in 1977, and later in that same year, unfortunately, his mom was thrown out of a building and died about 14 months later due to complications. But there's a lot of controversy there. And in this song, he's lampooning this military government and mocking their military moves, and it makes them extremely angry. So this is an amazing tune. So Zombie by Fela Kuti. There's also the song Upside Down, which is sung by Sandra Isidore, Fela Kuti's composition, Upside Down. Gentleman, ITT, Water, No Get Enemy, Lady. You literally could go on and on. And he had an early band that played high life named Kula Labitos. And then later, again, through that pivotal year of 1969, goes back to Nigeria after being energized with Africa by Sandra Isidore. Now, Sandra Isidore is also inspired by Fela and his musicians as her doorway to Africa as well. So you can't really go wrong. Just look up Fela Anikulapo Kuti, one who carries death in his pouch. He's saying he can't die. And to a large degree, listening to all of this music and the legacy found in Afrobeat, Afrobeats, in hip hop, and all of the inspiration, he literally continues to live on in spirit.
He absolutely does. So now let's talk about West Africa.
Okay.
That is now available. For your listeners, new and old, what can they look forward to your project? Because this is your latest offering as a musician.
So West Africa was inspired in terms of the title by Hugh Masekela. Common Ground, my band, opened for him at the National Black Arts Festival in Atlanta. And he greeted the crowd, and the crowd was so energized. He said, wow, you all really get it. That I don't know if you all are African Americans. I don't know if you're Black Americans. He said, I think this is West Africa. I think that you all are West Africans. And I kept that moment stayed with me. And as I began to reconcile with my history, reconcile with how I looked at the world, I decided to write an album that had each song was a vignette of a creation story. And in that creation story, there's some coming of age for me. There's also a reflection on how we represent as West Africa in the diaspora. And before 1830, you hear that year 1619 all of the time, but before 1830, most Black people in North America were born in Africa and identify based on their ethnic groups from Africa. And so knowing that no human being's history is less than 200 years old, I wanted to explore what that expression of the experiences of those early Africans that were captive in these spaces and how a unique expression was born out of that. And so there are several tunes on there that I could encourage everyone to listen to. The one that is doing extremely well is entitled Kaleidoscopic Universe. Kaleidoscopic Universe. There's also a tune, Let the Drum Remind You. There is the solution, the idea of it has to do with transcendence and meeting the challenges in front of you simply as a path on the road. The Igbo of Southeast Nigeria say the ram enters battle head first. And this idea of going into life with deep intention and being very robust with that that project represented that for me. I wanted to say something about our experience here. And I ask that you give a listen as it tells that particular story.
Perfection. So March 25th
Yes.
is a big date for Mausiki Scales and Common Ground. Please, you know, let the Common Ground Collective, please tell our audience what is happening on that day.
March 25th, we are performing a show themed Give the People What They Want. Afrobeat, funk, soul. It's the best party that you've ever attended. You get you a dose of Afrobeat, and we tend to perform at these shows literally nonstop for about two hours, usually 2 hours plus. In that same tradition of Afrobeat, Fela shows typically would go from around midnight to 6 a.m, like 6 hours. We're not going that long, but we will be delivering some original material, Kaleidoscopic Universe. We'll be exploring the works of Manu Dibango, Hugh Masekela, Fela Kuti, Miriam Makeba, James Brown, Roy Ayers, some of the classics. So it will be a dance party. You don't want to miss it, right? So see if we could party as hard as we struggle.
And they can find out more about the information regarding the March 25th celebration on your website, MausikiScales.com. Of course, that's probably on the bottom of your screen right now, because you know how we do on cue points.
Okay.
And again, as we encourage, especially the younger kids, I'm not gonna call them kids, young people, younger than me anyway, to take a hold of what's happening with this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and this opportunity now to nominate and to vote for Fela Kuti. Can you just inspire your students right now to take that vote, to take that stand regarding Fela Kuti? And
absolutely. I mean, we are looking at someone who had an extremely dynamic band. Many label him eclectic. He would get on stage, take his shirt off, or get on stage and smoke a spliff. He married 27 women in one ceremony. And we're looking at someone who would get up on stage with the Black Power fist. And so he represented this image that we recognize today in terms of the B-boy, in terms of hip hop, in terms of just the clothes that he wore, the courage that he exhibited through his music. I mean, this is a man who, for his beliefs was constantly in jail, and named Kalakuta Republic after one of the cells that held him. So through that resilience, his music represents an affirmation of Blackness, or he would self-describe as the Black president. And so it is very affirming. It is music that unites. It's music that breaks down the social barriers between people. When you listen to that music, it's very difficult not to dance. It's very difficult not to move. It's very difficult not to want to even dig further. And so the idea of having an elevated consciousness, his music, he would say, well, welcome to the underground spiritual game. And I think it's very powerful to see ourselves within that music. And when I talk about transcendence, it's not just about the spliff. Let me be specific, right? It's not just about that. To connect that to us in diaspora, again, when we listen to the early spirituals, there's the commentary, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry home. This music, for many captive Africans, many enslaved Africans, the idea of home was Africa.
Yes.
And then later in those spirituals, it became heaven, and at some point, any place other than this cotton field. So many references to chariots in terms of carrying one home, and the blues musicians speaking of the trains, right? This idea of train taking us to freedom. Sun Ra in the 1950s, he's considered archetype dealing with Afrofuturism, said he wanted to take Black people to an intergalactic Egypt free of oppression. Parliament Funkadelic, right? Yeah. Same concept with the mothership. Speech in Arrested Development, the idea of taking me to another place. Kindred, far away from here. So this idea of an exodus, even if we go to these spaces for temporary relief, there's something of value there. And I think that Fela offers us that same thing. It's not escapism like, oh, I can't take it completely, but let me go, let me energize and come back. So when he says this idea of another underground spiritual gain, it's that I feel the same spirit of those other songs in terms of his music, where it allows for us to escape into just to wake up the next day. So resistance music does not necessarily have to just be fist in the air, but the deep value of Fela Kuti's music, the deep value of African tradition in diaspora and on the continent, and it's music that the world consumes today. It's like people are lining up for this music. So why not let's hold Fela as well as these other musicians with some deep reverence. Give them your vote.
Absolutely. This Mausiki Scales, this has been, first of all, please make sure you put some time in your schedule in the near future, because I can already tell that I'm going to be coming to you again for your knowledge, because this has been eye-opening. I've really appreciated your time. We are going to make sure that everybody watching this is going to know how to get to you at mausikiscales.com.
I would appreciate you having me too. This has been a blast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we shall do this again. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank
you.
Look, did I lie?
Listen, you did not lie.
Mausiki Scales is the truth.
Absolutely. There was so many gems in that conversation, Sir Daniel. So kudos. And yes, like Wani said, I love this interview. Very informative. Just dope. Yeah. And thank you to Mausiki Scales for chatting with us, man. That was dope.
Like, just the gems, like, we knew, but he really drove home the point about many different things that we've addressed here on this show, about consumerism, about the spiritual aspect to this thing that we call Black music. And it was just very affirming to have this brother on the show. And now I know I have my doorway into into Fela Kuti and the things that I need to listen to, because best believe I'm gonna be knocking some zombie after this.
So check real quick. So Mausiki Scales mentioned, so my favorite Fela Kuti joint is Zombie, point blank. Like, it sends me every time. And for the song to have so much message in it, right?
Yeah.
And force you also to move your feet and to think while you're moving your feet. It's like the blackest thing you could do.
Every single time. It's all connected. Mm-hmm. You call it the Holy Ghost, catching the Holy Ghost. Mm-hmm. He calls it elevation. All of that stuff is all connected. It's the same exact thing. And it's ours, y'all. Stop looking down on something that you don't know about. It's yours. It is yours. It is yours.
I want to shout out Water No Get Enemy. Let me say it right. But that's from the Expensive Shit album. It's only 2 songs. This Fela Kuti, right? These songs is like long. So one side is Expensive Shit and one side is Water No Get Enemy. So definitely peep that. And Fear Not for Man is also one of my favorites as well. Shout out to Morris Singletary. Hey, Morris.
Whoa,
yes. Like, thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thank you, Latran.
Hey, Latran. I'm sorry I missed that. Thank you so much for tuning in. But yeah, so those are my joints. Definitely Zombie. Definitely Water No Get Enemy, and definitely Fear Not for Man are my 3 favorite Fela joints. And we're going to do a playlist, as we would do on Q Points, dedicated to Mausiki Scales. Yeah.
We must. And again, shout out and thank you to Jonathan Blanchard of JB's Records, a musician himself, The he has a title. He's like the world acclaimed bass, or he's a part of a as a singer. He sings bass, and he's world acclaimed. So listen, March 25th is also a big deal because that is the date. If I'm not mistaken, that is the reopening of the relaunch of JB's Record Lounge. The brick and mortar is coming back on that same day. So you can grab you some Fela Kuti records from JB's Record Lounge. And you can also go to the Common Ground, Mausiki Scales and Common Ground Collective performance that same day. It'll be a grand day for everybody involved.
Absolutely. Listen, one of the things, as y'all know, we are doing this because we are encouraging everyone to vote as a fan for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So on Q Points, we are covering the 4 Black artists that are up for nomination, and that is Dionne Warwick, Lionel Richie, Fela Kuti. And next week, we are going to talk about A Tribe Called Quest. But you can vote every single day, and we encourage you to go on the website and vote. Fan votes get counted along with the official votes that get sent in, and we have to make sure that we're honoring our folks, and happy that we got to do this for the Fela Kuti tonight. And thank you to you, Sir Daniel, for just an amazing interview, man. That was dope.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all. And look, what do I always say? Wait, before we wrap up, we got everything? We did all our housekeeping?
No, we ain't do our housekeeping. So I'm gonna do our housekeeping real quick. So make sure, we got to do our things. Make sure that you head over to our website and become a Q Points Insider. We're going to put the link in the chat for those live, and it'll be in the description. Also, make sure that you subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and on Podchaser, and on YouTube, and make sure that you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Podchaser, and putting all of those links in the chat as well. We would really appreciate it. It helps to spread the word about the show.
Absolutely. And this Saturday, don't forget, join me for the second installment of Sugar Honey on the Rocks. On Mixcloud, you can join me Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at mixcloud.com/TheSirDaniel. It's real simple. You go to that page, follow me so you can subscribe, so you can get the notifications. But yeah, I'm spinning live again on Saturday, vinyl. And this week, I think I'm doing some golden era hip hop.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the ladies have been in the news a lot this week, and if you've been following me on Instagram and seeing my reels, there's a lot of stuff that's been going on as far as the ladies of the golden era. So I'm going to be dropping a vinyl set on Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Sugar Honey on the Rocks, and I would greatly appreciate it if you guys stop by and just jam with me for a little hour on the afternoon, or your Saturday afternoon.
Can I say real quick? I'm a big you up. Sugar Honey on the Rocks last Saturday was the move, y'all. I'm not even saying this because DJ Sir Daniel is my brother and I was behind the scenes. I was literally over here dancing, and there was one joint. I was like, I've never even heard this. What is this?
The Jamaica girls. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was like, I've never even heard this joint. So shout out to you, Sir Daniel, for doing what you did last week, and looking forward. I won't be able to hear you this week, but I know it's going to be dope. So yeah, join Sir Daniel for Sugar Honey on the Rocks. The link is in the chat, and it'll also be in the description too.
Yes, y'all. So again, what do I always say every single week? In this life, you have a choice. You can either pick up the needle or you can let the record play. I'm Sir Daniel.
I'm J Ray, y'all.
This has been Q Points. Thank you. We'll see you next week.